Welcome, everyone, to our deep dive today. And we're going to be talking about the collapse of the Assad dynasty in Syria.
Yeah.
And, their 54-year grip on power just like vanished like
It
that.
really is remarkable how quickly things changed,
Right.
especially for a regime that had seemed so entrenched for decades.
Yeah, it really is like something out of a political thriller.
Right.
We've got all your research here and some news articles, and we'll try to sort of lay out for you, who the major players are in all of this and, just what happened and what it could mean for Syria going forward.
Yeah.
I'm particularly intrigued by the religious aspects of this conflict. There's a
Yeah.
lot more there than meets the eye.
Yeah, the religious dynamics definitely add another layer of complexity
Right.
to an already very complicated situation.
One thing that really struck me was the symbolism of the rebel group burning Hafez al-Assad's tomb.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't just like a change in leadership, right?
Right.
This is a complete rejection of the entire Assad legacy. And to do it in Kardaha,
Right.
their ancestral home city, that's a powerful message.
Absolutely. It's a very deliberate act
Yeah.
meant to signal a clean break from the past.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to remember that Hafez al-Assad, the father of the recently ousted president Bashar al-Assad, ruled Syria
Right.
with an iron fist for 30 years
Yeah.
before his son inherited power in 2000.
Right.
So this isn't just about political maneuvering.
Yeah.
This is about dismantling a dynasty that's been in place for over half a century.
Yeah, and the speed with which it happened is just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
The rebel coalition led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, took control in just 2 weeks.
Wow.
2 weeks.
That's incredible.
It makes you wonder what was the tipping point
Yeah.
that led to such a rapid collapse.
Well, there were definitely underlying factors that contributed to the Assad regime's vulnerability.
Right.
The 13 years of brutal civil war resulted in over 500,000 deaths and 12 million people displaced.
Oh, my God.
So that had taken a huge toll on the country.
Yeah.
And the conflict also exposed deep-seated resentment towards the Assad regime,
Yeah.
particularly among the Sunni majority,
Mm.
who felt marginalized under Alawite rule.
Right.
And it's also worth noting that while the final takeover was swift, the rebel groups, including HTS, had been steadily gaining ground for years.
Right.
This wasn't a sudden outburst. It was the culmination of a long and bloody struggle.
You mentioned the religious tensions, and I gotta admit, that's the part I'm finding most fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you break down the religious dynamics at play here for our listener?
Sure. So the Assads belong to the Alawite sect,
Okay.
which is a minority branch of Shia Islam,
Right.
primarily concentrated in the Latakia province.
Okay.
And they've essentially been ruling over a predominantly Sunni Muslim population.
Right.
And so this inherent power imbalance has fueled a lot of the unrest, with many Sunnis feeling like they've been systematically excluded from power and influence.
That makes sense. It must be a truly terrifying time for Alawites now.
Yeah.
Wondering if they'll face reprisals with the Assad regime gone.
It's a valid concern, especially considering the violence and atrocities that has marked this conflict.
Right.
However, there have been some interesting developments that suggest a potential path towards reconciliation.
Interesting.
Rebel representatives, including those from HTS and the Free Syrian Army, or FSA,
Right.
which is a more moderate secular faction within the opposition,
Yeah.
met with Alawite elders in Kardaha,
Okay.
and they signed a document that emphasizes the importance of religious and cultural diversity in Syria.
Okay, that sounds like a huge step
It is.
towards reconciliation,
Yeah.
especially considering the bad blood that exists.
Yeah.
What are the key provisions of this document, and what are the chances of it actually being implemented?
Well, it's too early to say for sure,
Right.
but the document outlines a commitment to protecting the rights of all religious and ethnic groups,
Okay.
ensuring their representation in government, and preventing discrimination. However, the real test will be in the implementation.
Right.
There are deep-seated mistrust and resentment on both sides,
Yeah.
and transforming those feelings into genuine coexistence
Yeah.
will take time and sustained effort.
I can only imagine what I find particularly intriguing is the role of HTS in all of this.
Yeah.
They have a complicated history, right?
They do.
Evolving from an al-Qaeda affiliate to a group that's now presenting itself as more moderate and
Yeah.
willing to embrace inclusivity. How did this transformation occur?
It's a complex evolution, and there are different interpretations of the motivations behind it.
Okay.
Some argue that HTS has undergone a genuine ideological shift,
Right.
renouncing its extremist past and embracing a more pragmatic approach focused on governing and rebuilding Syria.
Right.
Others see it as a tactical maneuver,
Okay.
a way to gain legitimacy and international acceptance in the wake of the Assad regime's fall.
So it's a bit of a wait-and-see situation.
It is.
It's worth noting that Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, the leader of HTS, has even started using his real name, Ahmed al-Shura,
Right.
and has publicly promised to uphold Syria's diverse communities.
While this might signal a change in approach, it's important to remember that actions speak louder than words.
Right.
The international community, including the UN envoy to Syria, has welcomed these statements,
Yeah.
but is urging HTS to match its rhetoric with concrete actions that demonstrate a real commitment to inclusivity and human rights.
Right.
This means addressing past abuses,
Yeah.
ensuring the equal treatment of minorities, and participating in a genuine power-sharing arrangement.
The U.S. State Department has indicated a willingness to support a new Syrian government, but only if it emerges from a credible and inclusive process that respects minority rights.
Right.
It seems like the international community is really placing a lot of emphasis on inclusivity
They are.
as a cornerstone of any future Syrian government.
Yeah.
Why is this so important, especially in the context of a country that's been so deeply divided?
Well, inclusivity is seen as key to preventing further conflict and instability
Right.
by ensuring that all groups feel represented
Yeah.
and have a stake in the political process.
Okay.
It reduces the likelihood of resentment and marginalization that could lead to future uprisings.
Makes sense.
It also sends a message that Syria is moving away from its history of authoritarianism and sectarianism towards a more democratic and pluralistic society.
Okay, so we've got this fascinating situation where a long-standing dynasty has been toppled, religious tensions are simmering, and there's this glimmer of hope
Yeah.
for a more inclusive future.
Right.
The big question now is, can Syria actually achieve lasting peace and stability after decades of conflict and oppression?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The path ahead is fraught with challenges.
Right.
There are deep wounds to heal, mistrust to overcome, and a complex web of internal and external actors with competing interests.
It's definitely a lot to unpack. Let's delve a little deeper into those challenges and potential solutions in part 2 of this deep dive. See you there.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a complex landscape, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is this potential for change comes after years of seemingly intractable conflict.
Right.
You know, the Assad regime, as we know, was notorious for its brutality.
Yeah.
You were likely following the reports of torture, imprisonment, and violence against civilians,
Right.
all of which fueled that widespread resentment that we were just discussing.
Absolutely. The human cost of this conflict is just staggering, you know?
It is.
It's easy to get caught up in the political machinations,
Right.
but it's important to remember that for the average Syrian, this is about trying to rebuild their lives
Exactly.
amidst the ruins of war.
Yeah.
What does this shift in power actually mean for them?
That's a crucial question. If these promises of inclusivity are genuine,
Right.
it could represent a real chance for peace and stability, something they haven't known
Right.
for an entire generation.
Yeah.
Imagine a Syria where different religious and ethnic groups can actually coexist peacefully without the constant fear of oppression or violence.
It's a hopeful vision, but realistically, can that kind of transformation actually happen
Right.
after so much bloodshed and division?
It's undoubtedly a monumental task.
Yeah.
There are deep wounds that need healing,
Right.
and rebuilding trust after such profound betrayals is a long and difficult process.
Yeah.
But this moment does present a unique opportunity.
Right.
With the Assad dynasty out of the picture, there's a chance to create a new political order, one that's truly representative of all Syrian people.
So how would that work in practice? What are the concrete steps needed to transition from a dictatorship to a more democratic and inclusive system?
Oh, yeah.
It seems like an incredibly daunting challenge.
You're right, it's not a simple fix. There are several key challenges that need to be addressed.
Okay.
For starters, there needs to be a process for drafting a new constitution,
Right.
one that guarantees basic rights and freedoms for all citizens, regardless of their religious or ethnic background.
That makes sense. A foundational document that sets the ground rules
Yeah,
for a more equitable society. But who would be involved in creating that document?
Right.
How do you ensure that the process is truly representative
Right.
and doesn't just become another power grab by the dominant group?
But that's the crux of it.
Hmm?
You need a broad-based, inclusive dialogue
Okay.
involving representatives from every segment of Syrian society.
Okay.
We're talking about women, minorities, civil society groups. Everyone needs a seat at the table.
Right.
It can't just be a backroom deal struck between the most powerful factions.
It sounds like you're advocating for a bottom-up approach,
I am.
where the Syrian people themselves have a direct say in shaping their own future.
Right.
Is that a realistic possibility in a country that's been under authoritarian rule for so long?
It's essential, even if it's incredibly challenging.
Right.
And it needs to be a transparent process, open to scrutiny and accountability.
Okay.
This is where the international community can play a supportive role by facilitating dialogue, providing technical expertise, and holding all parties accountable to their commitments.
I see. So it's not just about internal change, but also about responsible engagement from the global community.
Exactly.
Looking at it from that perspective, it almost feels like a massive social experiment with incredibly high stakes.
It does.
Has anything like this ever been attempted before? Are there any historical examples we can learn from?
Absolutely. There are valuable lessons to be learned from other countries that have undergone similar transitions.
Like what?
South Africa, after the end of apartheid, established a Truth and Reconciliation Commission
Oh, wow.
to address past injustices and promote healing. That model could be adapted to the Syrian context to help bridge the deep divisions that exist.
That's a fascinating parallel. A truth and reconciliation process could be incredibly powerful in a country that has experienced so much trauma and division.
It could.
But what about the role of external powers? Countries like Russia, Iran, and the U.S.
Right.
have been deeply involved in the Syrian conflict, often pursuing their own agendas. How do we prevent these external influences from derailing this fragile transition?
That's a major concern. It's crucial for the Syrian people to drive this process without undue interference from external actors.
Okay.
The international community needs to respect Syrian sovereignty and support a solution that is truly led by Syrians for Syrians.
Right.
It's their country, their future.
Okay, so we've talked about the overarching challenges, the need for inclusivity, internal ownership, and responsible international engagement.
Right.
Let's zoom in now on the specific groups involved.
Okay.
We've mentioned HTS, the FSA, and the Alawite community.
Yeah.
Can you give us a bit more insight into each of these players and what their roles might be in shaping Syria's future?
Sure. Let's start with HTS, which has emerged as a dominant force in the rebellion.
Okay.
They've gone through a complex evolution, transitioning from an al-Qaeda affiliate to a group that now claims to have renounced its extremist ideology. But their past actions still raise questions about their true intentions and their commitment to inclusivity.
Right. Their history does give one pause.
It does.
But it seems they're trying to rebrand themselves, projecting a more moderate image to the world.
Yeah.
Is that a genuine shift or simply a calculated tactic to gain power and legitimacy?
It's difficult to say with certainty. Only time will tell if their actions match their words.
Right.
If they truly want to be part of a new inclusive Syria,
Yeah.
they need to demonstrate a willingness to compromise, respect minority rights, and fully renounce violence.
Right.
The international community, and especially Syria's neighbors, will be watching them very closely.
And what about the FSA?
Yeah.
They're seen as a more moderate, secular faction within the opposition.
Right.
What's their vision for Syria, and do they have a viable path forward in this new landscape?
The FSA has consistently advocated for a democratic, pluralistic Syria,
Okay.
free from authoritarian rule. They've been key players in the fight against Assad, but their influence has waned in recent years as HTS has gained strength.
So where do they stand now? Do they still have a significant role to play in building a new Syria?
They certainly have the potential.
Okay.
Their commitment to democratic principles and inclusivity aligns with the aspirations of many Syrians.
Right.
The challenge for them will be to regain their strength and influence and to engage constructively in the political process. They could be a crucial voice for moderation and pragmatism.
And finally, let's talk about the Alawites.
Oh.
They've been so closely tied to the Assad regime for decades.
Right.
How are they navigating this new reality where they're no longer the dominant power?
It's a precarious situation for them.
Yeah.
There's understandable fear and anxiety about their future in a post-Assad Syria.
Yeah.
They're a minority group and they've been targeted by some rebel factions in the past.
Right.
There's a lot of uncertainty about their place in a new political order and whether they will be afforded the same rights and protections as other groups.
You mentioned earlier that there have been some initial attempts at reconciliation between the rebels and Alawite leaders.
Right.
Is there any real hope for peaceful coexistence between these groups? After all, they've been on opposing sides of a brutal conflict for years.
It's too early to say, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
However, those early signs of dialogue are encouraging even if they're tentative.
Okay.
If both sides approach each other with a genuine desire for peace and reconciliation,
Right.
it might be possible to build a future where Alawites feel safe and respected as equal citizens.
Okay.
But it will require a significant shift in mindset on both sides, a willingness to let go of past grievances and focus on building a shared future.
This all seems incredibly precarious. It feels like Syria is at a crossroads,
It is.
with the potential for both great hope and utter disaster.
It does.
The path ahead is uncertain, but there seems to be at least a glimmer of hope that the country could break free from the cycle of violence and create a more just and equitable society. But it's going to take a monumental effort, right?
Absolutely. The stakes are incredibly high. The choices made in the coming months and years will determine whether Syria descends further into chaos or emerges as a beacon of hope and resilience in a region desperately in need of both.
It's a story that will continue to unfold, and we'll certainly be here to help you understand the complexities as they develop. But before we get to those future implications, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far and see if we can glean any broader insights from this situation. Okay, so we're back, and I gotta say, this deep dive has been pretty intense.
Oh, there we are.
We've covered a lot, from the fall of a dynasty to, all these religious tensions and the possibility of a more inclusive Syria.
It's a lot to absorb, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think what's particularly striking is how this situation in Syria really highlights those universal challenges of transitioning from authoritarian rule to something more democratic and inclusive.
Yeah.
These are themes that have played out repeatedly throughout history, and I think the lessons learned from the Syrian experience could have implications far beyond its borders.
That's a great point. It's easy to get caught up in the specifics of this one situation.
Right.
But, those broader questions about how societies transition from, oppression to freedom, from division to unity.
Right.
Those are questions that resonate around the world.
They do.
So let's zoom out a bit and consider, the wider context. What can the world learn from Syria's struggles and its attempts to build a new future?
I think one of the most crucial takeaways is the absolute necessity of addressing those underlying grievances and inequalities that often fuel conflict in Syria, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
The Assad's minority rule over a predominantly Sunni population created this simmering resentment that ultimately erupted into violence.
Yeah.
So any attempt to transition to a more stable and equitable system has to deal with those root causes head on.
Yeah.
You can't just ignore them or paper over them.
That makes perfect sense. It's not just about changing the fizz at the top, but about fundamentally transforming the power structures and systems that perpetuate inequality and injustice.
Exactly.
What about the role of external actors? We've seen how interference from countries like Russia, Iran, and the U.S. has made the situation in Syria even more complex.
Yeah.
What lessons can we draw from that?
Well, I think Syria serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of proxy wars and external meddling in internal conflicts when outside powers prioritize their own interests over the needs of the people on the ground.
Right.
It often intensifies the violence and makes it much harder to find lasting solutions.
Right.
So I think the international community needs to shift towards a more collaborative multilateral approach that prioritizes peace and reconciliation rather than fueling division.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's like we need a global shift in mindset from seeing these conflicts as opportunities to exert power and influence to seeing them as opportunities to foster cooperation and build a more peaceful world.
Yeah.
And speaking of building the process of creating a new inclusive political system seems incredibly complex and fraught with potential pitfalls. It requires careful planning, broad-based participation, and a real commitment to compromise. What can other countries learn from Syria's efforts, both its successes and its failures, as it attempts to navigate this difficult transition?
Well, while Syria's experience is unique in its specifics, I think it offers valuable lessons, even cautionary tales, about the importance of inclusivity, transparency, and a genuine willingness to share power.
Okay.
Transitional justice mechanisms such as Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, as we discussed earlier, can play a vital role in addressing past wrongs and promoting healing.
Right.
But ultimately, the success of any transition hinges on the willingness of all parties involved to put aside their differences, however deep they may be, and work together to create a shared future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with a mix of emotions. There's a sense of hope that Syria might finally find a path to peace and stability, but also a real awareness of the enormous challenges that still lie ahead.
I think that's an honest assessment.
Yeah.
I think the situation in Syria remains fluid and uncertain, and there are no guarantees.
Right.
But the Syrian people have demonstrated extraordinary resilience throughout this ordeal, and there's a palpable yearning for change, a longing for a more just and equitable society.
Yeah.
And it's ultimately up to them to chart their own course.
And for us as informed global citizens, we have a responsibility to bear witness to their struggles, to grapple with the complexities of the situation, and to support those efforts towards peace and reconciliation in whatever ways we can.
Absolutely.
The story of Syria is far from over, and we'll certainly continue to follow its developments. But for now, I hope this deep dive has provided you with the knowledge and insights you need to engage with this important issue in a meaningful way.
And perhaps it's even sparked a desire to learn more, to delve deeper, and to find ways to contribute, however small they may seem, to a more positive future for Syria and its people.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.